Good evening, everyone. It's 5:30 on this Tuesday, the 16th of January. You've joined us here at NMDA's Healthy Soil Program to learn this evening how individual applicants apply for Healthy Soil Program grants to improve their soil. I'm Katie Getz, a co-lead of NMDA's Healthy Soil Program, and joined by my fellow co-lead, Dean Bruce. So a bit of welcome and a bit of housekeeping as well. We invite you as you're showing up to take a moment if you'd like and introduce yourself in the chat, noting perhaps what part of New Mexico you're tuning in from this evening, noting whether you manage cropland, rangeland, another type of land here in New Mexico, perhaps a combination thereof. And we offer this bit of housekeeping reminder. You'll follow along with me there at the bottom of the screen, some really handy buttons that we encourage you to be mindful of this evening. Off to the left side of the screen is a mute button, and we ask that you stay on mute for the duration of the presentation so that we get a really good audio recording. You'll also see the stop video button. And to maintain a good recording as well for video purposes and audio purposes, we encourage you to keep your video off until the end of the presentation when we're not taking up so much bandwidth with our PowerPoint. You'll see a chat button there in the center of your screen, again, the place to drop your questions during tonight's presentation. And last but not least, there to the far right, the raise hand feature. We are recording, as I say here on the screen. We will share these slides plus a subtitled video, which will take some time to produce, and we'll share those out soon. So tonight's agenda, it's all about NMDA's Healthy Soil Program grants, specifically targeted to you as individual applicants. So we'll go through a few basic questions to get us carved out this evening. You can follow along with me here on the screen. So we'll address who can apply, what projects are eligible, when projects can happen, where they can happen, how you yourself can apply, and why certain grant applications make the cut and certain others don't. So again, inviting those with their raised hands as we get started with this evening's presentation to keep on track. I'll ask you to please lower your hands and drop your questions in the chat. We'll get to those as we come to the end of tonight's presentation. So the question, very basic here, who in New Mexico can apply for NMDA's Healthy Soil Program grants? You'll look to the left-hand side of the screen and see that our first applicant type are our eligible entities. That is not the focus of tonight's presentation. But if you're a member of a pueblo, a tribe, a nation, part of that leadership structure, perhaps the leadership structure of an acequia, a land grant, a soil and water conservation district, maybe even involved in the leadership of your county extension office, or perhaps a local governmental entity that's not part of those named there above, but still fits the bill defined for us in our undergirding legislation. We invite you to come back this Thursday morning, starting at 10 o'clock, and we'll be speaking to that applicant type specifically come this Thursday. But again, who we're talking to tonight are our individual applicants. Very clearly on the right-hand side of the screen, those are our non-governmental parties. So whether you're here as an individual, as a business, as a nonprofit, so long as you are directly engaged in farming, ranching, or another form of land management here in New Mexico, you're at the right event, okay? We'll be talking about our application period. Perhaps you've already seen it in some of the printed materials on our website, but that period launches February 23rd. So we are well in advance of that, tonight being just January 16th. That application period is a 2-month-long window, ending February 26th at 12 p.m. That's noon, Mountain Time, of course. We're here in New Mexico. You'll hear us talk about our upper limit for funding per project implemented by an individual applicant. It's $22,000 per project. So another basic question, what projects are eligible for NMDA's Healthy Soil Program grants? Certainly what you see on the screen here is not exhaustive. Dean, my co-lead, will talk later about conservation planning for your unique situation, your unique piece of land, and how your project ideas will arise from that. But these are just a few examples to show you what practices can arise when you implement one or more of the 5 healthy soil principles. So I'll walk through these very quickly and invite you to learn more on our website. Very quickly, just from left to right there, the first principle, keeping soil covered. That may mean planting a cover crop, using organic mulch. Those would be practices that would revolve there around that first healthy soil principle. Principle number 2, they're represented by a tractor, minimizing disturbance on cropland and minimizing external inputs. So that may mean limiting tillage. That may mean limiting those synthetic inputs. It may mean rotating your livestock so you get that good amount of disturbance that we like. Principle number 3 is maximizing biodiversity, represented here pictorially speaking with a number of plants. So really what maximizing biodiversity amounts to is using diverse crop rotations, planting a diversity of cover crops, and working livestock into your land management scheme so that you're also bringing in some of the microbial life there. Principle number 4, maintaining a living root, pretty well speaks for itself. That means to reduce fallowing and maybe even plant a cover crop, as well as maintaining and promoting plant diversity on rangeland. Final principle, represented by a number of different animals there, is integrating animals into land management. So that may mean bringing them onto your cropland. That may mean reworking your grazing strategies on rangeland. That may mean planting pollinator habitat. Again, not an exhaustive list of the projects we have funded through our Healthy Soil Program grants, but just to kind of whet your appetite for what the 5 soil health principles look like when they're actually applied on the landscape. Again, what projects are eligible? We encourage you to check out this map. It's available on the Healthy Soil Program webpage, and it shows 4 years worth of projects funded since our first year way back in 2019, what we call our fiscal year 2020. So again, I invite you to check that out. And of course, you see a mix there of green and red dots. Those green dots represent an individual applicant project, whereas those red dots represent eligible entity projects, like I mentioned earlier. So again, you'll find that on the main webpage for NMDA's Healthy Soil Program. This slide is critical as well. When do projects funded by our program happen? What you want to observe from this screen is that these are 1-year projects, and really when we get down to it, they're 10-month projects. So because we're a state agency, we are bound to a state fiscal calendar that starts July 1st and ends June the 30th. So we basically take this month of July to welcome all of our successful grantees from this application cycle, get them trained up, get paperwork signed, basically get them ready to hit the ground running August 1st with some pre-project soil testing and soil assessment. You'll hear about that later. So projects run from August clear through near the end of May of 2025. And finally, we'll take that last month of our fiscal year, that's the month of June 2025, to wrap up any loose ends. So making sure that final reports are submitted according to the requirements of the program, making sure we have final soil assessment data from you, and that any reimbursements you are due are on their way back to you. So again, these amount to 10-month projects kicking off in August of this year and concluding in May of 2025. It's what we'll call fiscal year 2025. Where can Healthy Soil Program funded projects happen? Well, the short answer is nearly anywhere where land is being managed. So we offer a few examples here at the top: cropland, rangeland, forest land, orchards. We even have funded projects on market gardens, for community gardens, subsistence gardens even. The main thing is that projects can only occur where there's an existing relationship between you as the person applying, or the business applying, or the nonprofit applying, only where there's an existing relationship between you and the land where you intend the project to occur. So if that's someone else's land, perhaps a grandparent who's retiring or working themselves out of land management, but you've got permission to be there, that would certainly qualify. But you've got to have that landowner permission to implement a project on land you do not own. Last but not least, you'll see that text at the bottom of the screen that we have no minimum acreage requirement. We have welcomed projects that were submitted to us in acres, as well as projects submitted to us in square feet. So finally, how do I apply for a grant from NMDA's Healthy Soil Program? Hopefully this page looks pretty familiar to you. This is one of the places you'll land on NMDA's website after landing on that main Healthy Soil Program webpage. But I've circled for you at the top of the screen what you want to make sure you see when you come to this web page, which is you're looking at the requirements for individual applicants. Again, not eligible entities. So we want to make sure we're on this web page where we detail the step-by-step process by which people and businesses and nonprofits will apply for Healthy Soil Program grants. And it's at this point I'll turn it over to my co-lead, Dean Bruce, who will walk you through those steps. Dean?
Okay, thank you, Katie. As Katie gave a great introduction to just kind of the overall gist of the Healthy Soil Program, but tonight we want to guide you through actually applying for the Healthy Soil Program. So one of the first steps you're going to do is identify the partner that you will work with for your grant application. There's two different types of partners you're going to work with. First is a partner for conservation planning, and then also you have a partner for project sponsorship. For conservation planning, individual applicants must work with USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service here in New Mexico to complete their conservation planning. We have maps available on our website to guide you to your local NRCS service center, and so that you can get in touch with a Natural Resource Conservation Service planner to help you with the conservation planning process. Another key partner in this grant application will be your project sponsor. Your project sponsor is required for individual applicants. You can utilize either your soil and water conservation district in which you reside in, or your nation or your Pueblo tribe or nation in which you're a member of. So you have a couple different options, but project sponsorship is required. As we'll discuss just a little bit later, they will help you through the process of getting reimbursed and kind of guide you in those types of things. So next slide, please. Okay, the next step, I briefly mentioned that you will complete conservation planning with your nearest NRCS conservation planning office. So one of the first steps prior to meeting with NRCS is we would like you as individual applicants to develop a soil map if you are operating on cropland, or an ecological site description map if you have rangeland. This can be used using the web-based web soil survey, and you can complete that map. We have a video on how to complete that map on our website, and we encourage you to go to that step-by-step video. But it's critical for you to be able to create that soils map or that ecological site description map prior to making your appointment with NRCS to have conservation planning completed on your lands, so that you can understand the inherent soil properties that exist on your land, as well as the types of ecological sites on rangeland. That then guides you to see where you can develop your soil health goals based on the soils that exist on the land that you're managing. And again, we encourage you to have that completed prior to your appointment with an NRCS conservation planner. Next slide, please. Okay, so you might be asking yourself, what is conservation planning? Conservation planning and what you will do in conjunction with your NRCS conservation planner, they will help you identify the soil health related resource concerns on the land that you manage. So what are these soil health resource concerns? Some of the examples that might be identified on land that you manage, these are by no means a comprehensive list, or it's not anything that may occur on your land, but erosion, either wind or water erosion can occur throughout New Mexico, compaction, depleted organic matter, concentration of salts or other chemicals, loss or degradation of soil organism habitat, and then aggregate stability, which is poor soil structure. These are, again, just some examples of some of the things that the NRCS Conservation Planner may identify as soil health related resource concerns that exist on the land that you manage. So once you begin to identify these resource concerns, then we kind of move further on in the process. That's what the conservation planning process is in a nutshell. Next slide, please. So again, you will meet with your conservation planner, and you will go over the soil health related resource concerns that may exist on your land. And that is basically conservation planning. But you as an individual applicant, you have a couple different options. You can actually go through NRCS's program and get an NRCS developed conservation plan. It'll be a very comprehensive, in-depth conservation plan. Or NMDA has developed conservation planning templates. These templates are somewhat of an expedited version of a conservation plan. They contain all the critical information that you as a land manager may need to develop a healthy soil program grant application, but it's in a much shortened version. And if you opt to go this route, you do not have to establish farm records with NRCS or the USDA Service Center. This is simply an outside service that NRCS will provide, again, at no cost. But we do encourage you to seek NRCS assistance as soon as possible, because I believe if you've noticed on the last couple slides in red, the conservation planning must be completed with NRCS by March 22nd, 2024 at 5 p.m. And so we encourage you to get in there as soon as possible. And again, there's two different options. You can use an NRCS program developed conservation plan, or you can use NMDA's Healthy Soil Program conservation planning templates, which we've developed, one for cropland and one for rangeland. Special note, if you plan on applying for funding to conduct bale grazing as part of your Healthy Soil Program grant application, we also have a separate bale grazing template that you must submit in addition to your conservation planning documents that you've completed with NRCS through conservation planning. So next slide, please. Okay, again, this is a summary slide of how to get the most out of conservation planning, because there's likely several on here that have never worked with NRCS and have never went through the process of conservation planning. So one thing we want to do is we want to make conservation planning as most beneficial to you as possible, not just in your grant application, but to get the most out of conservation planning to help you as a land manager in the long run. So the first thing you want to do, again, I mentioned it earlier, is to use Web Soil Survey to create your soil map or your ecological site description map prior to meeting with your NRCS conservation planner. And this is critical. Again, this soil map or ecological site description map, it will detail what type of soil you have on your land, the capabilities of that soil, the inherent soil properties, sand, silt, clay, gravel. It'll identify all of that. And then the ecological site description map goes just a step farther, because it's tailored just for rangeland. It will identify the types of grasses, forbs, shrubs, etc., that should be growing on your land and in what percentage. So it gives you a ton of information just right at your hands. Again, we have a web tutorial that we created to guide you through the entire process of creating both a soil map or an ecological site description map. So that's one of the first things you need to do to get the most out of your conservation planning appointment with NRCS. The next thing you need to do is, prior to your meeting, you also need to have clear soil health related goals in mind that you can share with your NRCS conservation planner. The more information you can share with your conservation planner about where you want to go, what you want to do, that helps them determine some of the practices, some of the alternatives that they may offer you as suggested soil health practices to help improve your land. So you want to have those clear soil health related goals in mind prior to meeting with your NRCS conservation planner. Another thing you want to have on hand prior to meeting with your NRCS conservation planner is the current and past management details of the land. You want to be able to clearly share with your conservation planner what type of crop rotations you've had in, say, the last 3 to 5 years, what type of management you've utilized on your cropland. Do you use heavy tillage? Do you use minimum tillage? Have you incorporated cover crops at one point in time? All this is information that you want to be able to share with your conservation planner so that they can get a very in-depth look at what has currently been going on in the land and what's been done to it in the past, say, 3 to 5 years, or even longer. Some individuals will know the last 50 to 100 years of their land management. You also want to be able to describe the irrigation history. Does it have an irrigation history? Is it irrigated cropland, dry cropland? And also the grazing management. What's your grazing system look like? Approximately when do you graze certain areas of your land and stuff like that. That, again, gives a little bit more information for your conservation planner to make good quality alternatives and suggestions as they move forward in the conservation planning process. The last thing you want to do is ask lots of questions of your NRCS conservation planner. Don't be afraid to ask any questions, such as, what type of seeding mixes are appropriate? Maybe cover crops. What cover crops may be appropriate? What are some of the seeding or application rates that you may use? If the conservation planner recommends, a 3 species cover crop mix to be planted in the fall, You need to ask, how much of each species should I plant? Are there recommended planting dates? Stuff like that. Ask lots and lots of questions. Your conservation planner is likely to provide you with several different alternatives, alternative crop rotations, alternative grazing systems. And so we encourage you to ask lots of questions about each of those alternatives, the benefits, maybe some of the downfalls of some of those possible alternatives. That way, one, you develop a relationship with your conservation planner, but two, you get a big picture idea of the many options that you have to improve soil health on your land. And so I would encourage you, again, as you begin to think about meeting with your conservation planner, to have these things in mind before that meeting. That way you can get the most out of your conservation planning appointment with NRCS. Next slide, please. In addition to the Natural Resource Conservation Service, NMDA worked in conjunction with NRCS to create these resource concern guide sheets, which we will show you here shortly. We have one for cropland and one for rangeland. And what these resource concern guide sheets do is they exhibit the relationship between the soil health related resource concerns that were identified by the conservation planner and the soil health principles that Katie mentioned earlier, as well as example agriculture or conservation practices that can be used to address those resource concerns. So basically, we take the resource concerns that NRCS identified, we take the soil health principles that are critical to the Healthy Soil Program, and then we combine that and it ties it into the potential list of agriculture or conservation practices that you may use to address those resources. The resource concern guide sheets are simply there to help you decide which practices to implement in order to improve soil health. This is nothing that you have to turn in with your application package. It's simply a resource that we developed to help you as individual farmers, ranchers, and land managers to better make decisions on what soil health practices are appropriate for the land that you manage. Next slide, please. So once you get your conservation plan in hand from your NRCS conservation planner, whether it be a full NRCS conservation plan or the NMDA conservation planning templates, we ask that while reviewing your NRCS completed conservation planning documents, ask yourself just a few questions. Which soil health related resource concerns will my project focus on? Because as a conservation planner, they're likely to identify most, if not all, soil health related resource concerns that exist on your land. This may be a bit overwhelming, and sometimes it's better not to try to focus on every resource concern that is identified, but to simply focus on one or two. And so you need to ask yourself as you're going through that, which of these soil health related resource concerns do I want to focus on this year? And really kind of take a look at that. In addition, you might want to ask yourself which soil health principles that Katie mentioned earlier are going to best address the resource concerns that I've decided to focus on with my Healthy Soil Program grant application. Then we want to encourage you to ask which agricultural or conservation practices will best put those soil health principles into action. So this is where you start to begin to tie everything together. You've met with your NRCS conservation planner. You've identified those soil health related resource concerns. Now you have a focus on your project. You may want to focus on one or two key soil health related resource concerns. You're going to identify those soil health principles that you feel will best address those resource concerns. And then now you're going to start tying in agricultural or conservation practices that will best put those soil health principles into action, and then therefore improving the soil health on your operation. And so that's where you begin to tie everything together. And this is where your grant application really starts to take shape once you start developing and deciding which conservation practices you're going to use to improve soil health. So next slide, please. Again, after you have reviewed your documents, you've started to ask yourself, where do I want to focus this project? What are the soil health principles that I'm going to utilize? And then you've started to narrow down the agricultural or conservation practices that you're going to decide to implement. So once you've kind of got your list narrowed down, we encourage you to then again ask yourself, which of the agricultural or conservation practices that I've identified can be implemented during the grant term? As Katie mentioned earlier, we are essentially looking at a 10-month grant period. And so you have to begin to think, can I logistically implement each of these conservation practices that I've identified in the terms of the grant, which is 10 months? And so that's a key question you need to begin to ask yourself. Then you move on to what goods and services may I need to implement those conservation or agricultural practices on my land. So you've identified those practices. You've said to yourself, yes, I can implement them during the 10-month grant period. Now, what additional goods or services may I need to actually implement those? From what companies can I get those from? So you begin to start researching which companies will you source those goods and services from? And then what are the actual costs of those goods and services? You'll notice in the yellow kind of oblong circle there on the right-hand side of your screen, we recommend that you look at the FAQs as well as other valuable resources on our website. The FAQs have a wealth of information that will guide you how to implement, not how to implement practices, but maybe some certain restrictions or things that may or may not be eligible for this program. And so as you're going through this entire process, we encourage you to familiarize yourself with the FAQs as well as the other resources that are available on our website. We're going to show you those towards the end of the presentation. And those are key resources that will help you as you're starting to put your project together. So it's at this point that I'm going to turn it back over to Katie, and she's going to continue with the presentation.
Yeah, thank you, Dean. And for our audience, you probably gathered from Dean's comments that he's got a wealth of experience when it comes to natural resource management, to agricultural production. So it's great to have as a co-lead on this program someone who still maintains a strong foothold in production agriculture with both crops and livestock. Dean mentioned some of the resources you will find on our website. So this is a key one. I say that this is a key one because it accounts for 40% of the points that could be allocated to your application when it's submitted to us on time, complete, for review. So a lot of information about your project will wind up in this document. We'll take a closer look here in just a moment, but essentially this is part of step 4. So Dean walked you through that first step of identifying the partners you'll work with, that second step of reaching out to NRCS and completing conservation planning, that third step of developing your project idea. This is where the rubber meets the road here in step 4. You're going to take a lot of that information about the project activities and you'll put those over here on the left-hand side of the screen. Again, we'll take a look at the actual document here shortly. This is just a screenshot. But this is where you'll be documenting what it is you're doing, not just what you're buying, but what it is you're doing. On the right-hand side of the screen is what you're buying in order to implement what you're doing. So you can see that we've categorized the different goods between non-durable and durable. Non-durable simply being something that, yes, you can touch it, but it doesn't have a very long lifespan. So a lot of the supplies that we tend to fund through these grants cover crop seed, compost, mulch, biochar. These are things that you can touch, but they don't have a long lifespan. These are our non-durable goods. You may have some durable goods that you wish to request funding for. We may see from a rancher that they want to take a big pasture and bust it up into paddocks to further intensify their rotational grazing approach. So these durable goods are tangible things you can touch. They've got a long lifespan. T-posts, wire, PVC pipe, that sort of thing. So you'll notice here within this template that we remind you over and over again to go see our FAQs, our frequently asked questions, because within that document, we've done a pretty solid job, I think, of spelling out the things that will not qualify for funding. So you want to make sure that as you set to work completing this document, letting us know what your activities are, letting us know what your requested goods and services are, that you're consulting that FAQ, those frequently asked questions, to make sure that you're within bounds on your request. I mentioned services. When we talk services here, we're talking about specialized work. So labor for these projects is out of bounds unless it is specialized work. Perhaps you need to rent a no-till drill. Perhaps you need to hire someone who's got the no-till drill. So these would be specialized types of work performed by a business. That's a critical piece here as well. The first example of a service that is actually required for every project we fund through our program. You'll see this when we take a closer look at our timeline and budget template here. But our first requirement for all projects out of the chute is lab-based soil testing, meaning you'll be out in the field collecting soil samples, or maybe just a soil sample, depending on the piece of land you manage, but you're sending that off in the mail in order to get a baseline assessment, a baseline read of the chemistry within your soil. So that's something that, because we require it, we actually will reimburse you for that cost. So that should necessarily show up on this document that, again, integrates your project activities with all of the costs that you believe should be associated with the implementation of those activities. Again, we'll take a look a little closer here in just a few moments. Step number 4, continuing on. Lots of information on this slide. We recognize that. We offer just a few pictures and a few descriptions here to give you broad outlines of what is eligible for funding consideration versus what is ineligible for funding consideration. But again, there's that bright yellow bit of text there at the bottom, encouraging you to check out the frequently asked questions document on our website. And there you'll find more examples of things that are particularly ineligible for consideration. I'm going to take just a brief look at those things that are eligible for consideration, and we're not going to get into a deep Q&A about things that are eligible versus those that are ineligible, because those series of questions can be limitless. You think about these projects that we fund through our Healthy Soil program, they are so uniquely tailored to your piece of land, to the resource concerns within the soil on that land, to the project idea that you've come up with. So every project is going to look slightly different, and that's why we offer really broad guidelines for you to consider as you make your funding request. So very quickly, what's eligible for consideration? In terms of those non-durable goods, those tangible things that have a short lifespan, boom, cover crop seed, an easy one. Compost, biochar, mulch. So you want to make sure that what you're talking about with your conservation planner is to get good species recommendations, good seeding and application rates, and good dates for doing those things on your piece of land. When we talk durable goods, we're talking tangible things that have a longer lifespan than some of the supplies that will necessarily get consumed within the grant term. So these may be hand tools. We tend to see a lot of funding requests for simple hand tools. Bottom line, if the durable good you're requesting has a price tag of $5,000 or more, it is automatically out of bounds. That's based on our procurement code here at NMDA. So what you can consider requesting funding for are those durable goods that directly relate back to soil health improvement, so long as their price tag is $4,999.99 or less. That's a critical bright red line to observe. I mentioned services that we're willing to consider for funding. Those are those specialized pieces of work that are directly related to soil health. A good example here, I showed you testing as your first project requirement. Renting equipment might be another type of service that you could pitch for funding. Shifting your attention now to the right-hand side of the screen, to think about just broad outlines for those items that are ineligible for funding consideration. We offer pictures here of livestock. That's an easy one, that we will not put Healthy Soil program dollars toward the purchase of livestock. Similar story for cash crop seed. So if you're hoping to plant a chili crop, if you're hoping to put in some apple trees, those are automatically out of bounds. So make the distinction here between cover crop seed versus cash crop seed. I mentioned to you the real bright red line related to durable goods purchases. If it has a price tag of $5,000 or more, pretty typical for some of the equipment you might see on a farm or ranch, another piece of managed land. If that price tag is $5,000 or more, that's a simple one for us. It's out of bounds of our procurement code. We will not fund the purchase of that durable good. And services that are not related to soil health improvement will not be considered for funding. Also, services of general labor, the sort of labor you typically see on a farm, a ranch, a piece of managed land, that also is an ineligible funding request. So it's got to be specialized work, and it's got to be related to the soil. It has to be done by a company that is external to you, external to your family, external to the people on your payroll. So again, more information on the FAQ, a lot of good information there that we encourage you to check out specifically as it relates to those items that may or may not be eligible for funding consideration. Dean and I both touched on this, the need for project sponsorship. This helps all parties to remain in compliance with the state's anti-donation clause. So rather than NMDA being able to partner with you as an individual, we in turn partner with a soil and water conservation district or a tribal government. They in turn will partner with you as the individual land manager who's seeking Healthy Soil Program dollars. So what to do here is step 5. After you've gone through all of your conservation planning, you've developed that great project idea, you're putting together your timeline of activities and your budget, you're just about ready to hit submit on that application. This is one of those final steps where you take all the good materials you have developed and you approach either your soil and water conservation district or your tribal nation, if you're a member of one. You've got either of those 2 choices. But you'll take the sheet of paper that we'll show you on our website here shortly. We call it our letter of support template. So it simply replaces anyone having to originate a letter of support. All they've got to do is plug and play some information. There may be a deadline for you to get this from your intended project sponsor. I say this because your project sponsor may have monthly meetings. That's often the case with soil and water conservation districts. They may want to invite you before a board meeting to say, hey, we know you're interested in the Healthy Soil Program. Tell us about your project. Show us your conservation planning documents. What's your budget look like? What's your timeline of activities? These are all valid questions from the party that is willing to sponsor your project for 10 months. So what we say to people is, do not wait until April 26th when your application is due. Call those people, call your district or call your tribal government well in advance and let them know, hey, I'm interested in NMDA's Healthy Soil Program. I'll be reaching out to you for project sponsorship. When do I need to come see you by? It's as simple a conversation as that. So you'll see in bright red down here. Again, the deadline to complete this step may vary depending on your project sponsor. So you'll want to make sure you're reaching out to them well before that April 26th deadline when 12 o'clock noon hits and we close the door to receiving further applications. You want to make sure you've got all your ducks in a row. Step number 6, this is it. So you'll finalize and submit your online grant application by this deadline in bright red at the top. That's noon, 12 p.m. on Friday, April 26th. We've got a checklist there on our website, so this is a simple copy and paste. You'll just want to run through this checklist and make sure you've got all of these things complete, that they're saved in a folder there on your computer where you can easily upload them to our online application. So we ask, of course, for a simple picture of your project site. Adding notations to that is really helpful to us at NMDA and to the reviewers that we tap from outside the building. Dean mentioned you've got to have a soil map or an ecological site description map, depending on your land type. We'll ask for that so that we have an understanding of the inherent capabilities of the land. Dean also focused on the conservation planning documents. You've got either your full-fledged conservation plan or that abridged conservation planning template that we've come up with. Got to be signed and dated, completed by NRCS. Dean mentioned if you're doing bale grazing to really give a boost of energy to the biology in your soil where you're managing livestock, you've got to have that template completed by NRCS. You heard me focus on the timeline and budget template where you'll document all of your activities in chronological order and you'll spell out the durable goods, the non-durable goods, the services that you believe are essential for implementing those activities. I just touched on the letter of support template. Make sure that's signed and dated and completed by your project sponsor. This last item is optional. Sometimes we see letters of support, not the template, but actual letters of support by neighbors, from organizations, people who think you've got a really great project idea and they just want to give you a little boost to help you get past the finish line in this competitive process. Points are associated with most everything you see on this list, not with our optional items. Again, these are strictly optional. So it's whatever you believe would help a reviewer better understand your project and its value. What we want to show you here is what you will see when you ultimately go to put all of these items into place within your online grant application. So this is the screen for our grants management software. That's what you will see, but you won't see it now. And that's because the application, as you've heard us mention, it's not available until February 23rd. And you're welcome to write down this link, but you'll certainly find it at the Healthy Soil Program website. But once you give a click on this link, of course, it takes you away from our homepage and it'll take you towards our grant application software. So you'll just set up a simple free account there and you're ready to go. I mentioned that we would cover just in brief why certain Healthy Soil Program grant applications are successful, why certain others aren't. And some of this may seem pretty intuitive to you, but nonetheless worth considering as you start working on your project idea and some of those specific documents. You've heard me say, things got to be complete, they've got to be submitted on time. NMDA will not take late applications, nor will we take incomplete applications. So we're looking for everything that we've gone over to be submitted through our online grant application software. We've seen projects before that really look to us based on the budget as though a person is maybe trying to beautify a landscape or maybe wanting to do a feeding plan for their livestock. That's not what our program is about. So everything about your application has to point back to soil health and soil health improvement. That's a really critical one there as well. Also, conservation planning is the absolute foundation for any project submitted to us for funding. So you don't want to make the mistake of going totally off the rails of what it is the conservation planning documents say. Certainly, your project doesn't have to perfectly mirror what's in your conservation planning documents, but like Dean said, pick and choose the things from your conservation planning documents that you really want to focus on for your project. Certainly do not ignore entirely what's in there. We want to see projects and applications that are clear and specific about their activities, clear and specific about the timeline for implementing those activities. Within that same document, we're looking for budgets that are clear and specific about the names of the goods and the services that you're requesting funding for, that you have done some research on what those things cost, that the amounts of those goods and services are very clear. So when we see a request for a bale of hay, we are often left scratching our heads going, well, is that reference to a 75-pound bale of hay or something larger? So you want to be really clear about what it is you're requesting funding for, the names, the costs, the amounts of those things. I mentioned to you the importance of signatures showing that you've got the input of NRCS on your conservation planning documents and also the buy-in from your project sponsor. Last but not least, this one is really critical and it may not seem obvious to you, but successful applications are unique. They are tailored to the needs of the project side. They are specific to the land you stand on. So you want to not make the mistake of copying from someone else, of going to a website and hitting copy and paste. That would be a mistake. So every application we see is slightly different from the others because what conservation planning yields for you in terms of insights about your land is going to be really unique to that piece of land. So we've got a lot of time to take some questions. So I'll spend just a moment on this web page showing you some resources we strongly encourage you to check out. But Dean did mention, and I think I mentioned it too, we're actually going to visit the website that we're directing you to so that we can show you where all the things live, all the things that we've pointed out in tonight's presentation. So first things first, you have found your way to the home page if you have landed on this link. And there you will notice, if you scroll down to the bottom, we'll show it to you in just a moment, but you'll want to get subscribed to our weekly e-newsletter because through that newsletter, we offer deadline reminders, application tips. We'll point out some news articles that might be worth reading to you, some events you might check out in your spare time. Then we'll go a little deeper and check out the webpage that's specific to individual applicants. Here at the end is our contact information. We strongly encourage people to send us emails because with your good questions, sometimes we will fold those into our frequently asked questions document that you've heard us reference again and again this evening. We want that to be a good landing spot for people who probably have similar questions to you. So we welcome your emails at that address there on the screen. I wanted to give you a heads up about something that you'll see in the newsletter very soon, something that you'll see posted on our website, and that is we have another kind of application demonstration webinar coming up. It'll be on March the 5th. And so you'll notice that when our application launches is February 23rd. Basically, we're giving you about a week and a half, 2 weeks to take a look at that application, come up with some good questions, bring them to us on March the 5th when we walk through that application with you. So it's at this point, Dean, I'm going to stop sharing this screen and we will head on over to the NMDA website. So if you've landed here before, you've done well. This is just a bit of background on our program. We mentioned the application cycle, but where you want to turn for specific information is really going to depend on your applicant type. So you're here as individual applicants. That's the page that you'll want to check out. But while we're on the home page here, let me just scroll down and show you what else lives here. I mentioned to you this map, an interactive map, where you can click on a project and get some sense of where it happened, when it happened, who the project sponsor was, amounts awarded, project summary, practices implemented. So you're welcome to check that out when you've got a little bit of time. And this is where you'll input your information to make sure you're signed up for those Healthy Soil Program weekly updates I mentioned. All right, clicking over to our individual applicant specific web page here. We keep mentioning the FAQ. It addresses a lot of the questions that people tend to reach out to us with. So it's here at the top of the screen for easy finding. You made it here to this webinar. When we get our March 5th webinar details posted, that's where you'll find this information as well. Dean walked you through all these great steps of identifying the partners that you'll work with, NRCS information there. If you're reaching out to a district for project sponsorship, you'll click there, versus if you're a member of a tribal nation, you've got those two options you can choose from. Either way you go, you've got contact information available at those links. Dean also really focused on completing conservation planning with NRCS. He gave you the deadline of March the 22nd. And what we'll spend time on here is actually checking out one of those templates. So Dean, are you ready for that step?
Yes.
Okay, I'll give a click on the cropland template, but of course we've got the rangeland option as well.
Okay, so our conservation planning templates, again, like Katie mentioned, there is a cropland one, and there's one specifically geared for rangeland as well. So the template itself, fairly easy to navigate, just name, address, things like that. What the important part of this is, and I mentioned earlier, at the bottom of your screen, you see the first block there that you're going to fill out. That's for you as the individual applicant. That's where you would fill out your specific soil health related goals and be able to have that available for the conservation planner. It's critical that you have a good goal in mind as it relates to soil health and where you want to go with your land that you manage. And so that gives you the opportunity, albeit a small amount of text there, but it gives you an opportunity to describe your soil health goals on your operation. As you move down the list, you'll notice that the next few blocks are specifically outlined for the conservation planner to fill out. First, they're going to fill out your current management. And so you'll provide the planner with this information, but they'll actually type it in, what type of irrigation do you use? Is it drip irrigation? Is it flood irrigation? What type of tillage operations do you use? So the conservation planner is going to fill out that. Then they're also going to fill out the next block, again, for the conservation planner to fill out. What are the existing resource concerns on your land as they relate to soil health? This could be decreased water infiltration, compaction, organic matter depletion, erosion, lack of biodiversity, all these types of things that when the conservation planner meets you out in the field and starts looking at your land and maybe you get a shovel in the ground and start looking at stuff, that's what they're going to identify. So the conservation planner will again fill out that block. And then as we move below, this is where the conservation planner is really going to provide you a wealth of information. The conservation planner, they're well familiar with our soil health principles. And what they're going to help you do during your field visit, and maybe it's more than just a field visit. Maybe you go to the field and then sit in the office for a while and discuss these things. But they're going to sit down and make some recommendations for your land based on the resource concerns that they identified, based on the soil health principles. And then they're going to make some recommendations to you. So they're going to identify the soil health related resource concern on the left-hand side. The next column there, they're going to provide you with some recommended practices that would address those resource concerns. They might provide 3 or 4 different practices for each resource concern, or they may only provide 1 or 2. We do ask that they try to limit themselves to the space we have available, but so they're going to recommend an agriculture practice or maybe 2 or 3 alternatives. Then on the next column, this is where they're actually going to give you some planning criteria. And what I mean by planning criteria is, they're going to identify the specific field that this is going to occur, the amount that is going to occur, the date, the time, or the timing. Is it going to be in September? Is it going to be March? They're going to recommend some specific dates, amounts, implemented species, all those types of things. They're going to put that planning criteria right here. And then in the last column, they're going to use the soil health principles that are listed right up here above, and they're going to tie each of those agriculture practices back to a specific soil health principle. This is one case where you're probably going to have multiple soil health principles for each conservation practice because as you see, they're very tied together. They're linked together very well. And but they're going to list the soil health principles that are going to be tied to those ag practices that you're going to implement on your land. So the planner is going to provide all of this, and then on the bottom of the page, they have some space to where they can just provide some additional notes that may help you be successful in implementing this. They're also going to, any infield assessment results that they may have completed, some expected outcomes. We just give them some space to write, just kind of write some of their notes that they may have related to their conservation planning trip and appointment with you. And so this could be, just maybe some additional recommendations. But we also encourage them to do some infield assessments with you as well. And then finally, the planner and you will both sign it, and they will identify their name, their title, whether they're a soil con or rangeland management specialist, and also the local USDA service center, which they are a part of. And then again, that date is critical because, as Katie mentioned earlier, conservation planning must be completed prior to March 22nd at 5 p.m. So my recommendation when you start thinking about conservation planning, if this was me personally, I would sure be on the NMDA website tomorrow looking for my closest service center and trying to get on the phone as soon as possible to select a date with NRCS to start the conservation planning process. That's really it as far as the template. The rangeland template is virtually identical, but it does gear itself a little bit more to rangeland and grazing management and things like that. But the concept is exactly the same. They're going to identify resource concerns. They're going to work with you, look at your goals, and then they're going to provide some alternatives or some conservation practices and alternatives that you can use to improve soil health on your operation. As Katie mentioned earlier, we do have a bale grazing template. So if you are intending on utilizing bale grazing to improve your land, you must complete the bale grazing template. You have to work with NRCS and they will help complete the bale grazing template. It also must be signed off by an NRCS conservation planner. So again, as you're thinking about your project and your soil health related goals, it's good to have this kind of information on hand for the conservation planner up front to know that, hey, I've heard about this bale grazing. I think it would be good for my operation. Here's the bale grazing template, and you can have all of that completed in 1 or 2, visits with your conservation planner. So the bale grazing template we're not going to go through tonight, but NRCS is well aware of the criteria for bale grazing, and so they can definitely help you put together a quality bale grazing plan. I think we're just going to show you where the resource concern guide sheets are, because after you have worked with NRCS to get either a conservation plan or a template completed, to have these on hand even when you're meeting with your NRCS conservation planner. But first and foremost, they just help guide you to start thinking about resource concerns, ag practices, and the soil health principles and the relationship between those three things. So I think at this point, I'm going to let Katie kind of talk about the budget and timeline.
Yeah, thanks for that, Dean. So a lot of good resources here, and you can see that if it's blue and it's got a line underneath it, give it a click. It may be something that could be beneficial or required for your application. You saw a screenshot of the same budget timeline document within our PowerPoint slide. So I actually want to click it open and show it to you. So I'm going to give a click here, FY25 for fiscal year 25. Let's go ahead and open it. And it'll take just a moment to retrieve. But there's something really critical I want to point out to you here, and that is this banner up at the top of the screen. So sure, you could conceivably work down within the template here. Do not do that. You want to click download file. Make sure you are saving this to your computer so that you can work on it at your own pace, on your own device, save it, update it, edit it, revisit it, that sort of thing. So you want to download it first. And so what I'll do, Dean, is stop sharing here, and I'll go over to the actual document, what it looks like once you get it downloaded to your own particular computer. So while we're on this first tab, I'll just illustrate for you that we link back to those frequently asked questions that we keep referencing, because again, we've got some general restrictions against certain items for funding. So you'll want to make sure that you've got that FAQ handy as you work to complete this document. We ask you to be brief but specific about the activities you'll be implementing to carry out your project. Be brief but specific about the goods and the services you're requesting funding for. Be sure you're putting all this information in a chronological way so we can actually tell from this one document how your project is going to unfold. And last but not least, when you're done, simply upload the document that you will have created where we note within the online application. So again, what you want to do is download the file. You don't want to do what I'm about to do, which is just show you how the document works. The reason we're doing this is because we're slowed up on getting the actual document to function on my end. It's a function of my Wi-Fi this evening. What I want to illustrate for you here is just the functionality of this document. I showed you that there's a lot of good background information to keep in mind as you work to complete this document. Of course, you're starting off with your timeline and your project activities. So I'm going to start there, Dean.
Okay, so I think if we can get it to work online, Katie's going to show you the first column right there is the timing on when you're going to complete this. The project year is broken up into 3 different quarters, and so for each of these, you're going to select the quarter in which those practices would occur. So the first quarter, any practices between August and October of 2024, second quarter, November 2024 and February 2025. And then the third and final quarter is March 2025 through May 2025. So when you look at your conservation plan and you see that you're going to have some first quarter activities, there's going to be a drop down box that you can select the quarter in which those activities would occur. As Katie mentioned earlier, the very first thing that you will complete to be reimbursed for is soil testing. And so that's going to be the very first thing that you're going to put in your budget timeline template is you're going to select the first quarter, and then you are going to have the required soil testing, and this is to be completed before any project activities occur, because we want to see what the soil looks like chemically and and what the soil looks like before you have done any soil health practices. And so that's going to be the first thing you do. And so we've got it already kind of lined out for you. Lab-based testing is the first thing, and you'll select the first quarter. And this is going to be that pink, maybe salmon looking color over there. Those are for all the services that you're going to be you may require as part of your grant application. And as Katie mentioned earlier, services, one, lab-based testing. Services may be having to hire a company to maybe run a no-till drill over your place or something like that. Those are the services that you're going to pay for. So the first one is going to be lab-based soil testing. And what you'll do is you will describe the approach that you're going to use, the number of tests that you're going to complete. That can be based on recommendations from NRCS. Is it one sample per acre on a smaller place, or is it one sample per 40 acres on a larger place? And so NRCS will make recommendations on how many soil tests would give you the appropriate information that you need. And so you'll put the number of units in there. So let's say this is going to be a smaller market garden operation. We're going to say it's 1 acre. And based on the conversation you have with your NRCS conservation planner, they think it would be appropriate to do 3 soil tests on that 1 acre because you do have some different cropping systems, maybe some different vegetables and stuff like that throughout that 1 acre. And so NRCS may recommend 3 soil tests. So you're going to have 3 soil tests. That's what you're going to put in the units. You're going to describe it. Soil test at this lab. Like Katie mentioned earlier, be detailed, but not overly wordy on the description, just so that we can understand exactly what you're going to do. And so you're going to have the number of units. You're going to take 3 soil tests. You're going to describe it. It's a soil test. And then you're going to enter in the cost per unit. That may be, you've researched it, you've called some labs, done some internet searches, and you determine that it's going to cost you $65 per soil test. So that's where you're going to put that in. You're going to put $65 in that cost per unit. Now, one little side note to the cost per unit, you need to include everything it's going to cost for you to implement that particular thing in that cost per unit. So the total of the soil test is $65 per soil test. The spreadsheet will then auto-calculate the total. And again, I think we're kind of having some technical issues tonight, but please understand that once you download a copy of this budget template, it will auto-calculate everything for you. There's no reason for you to try to manually manipulate it or anything like that. It will auto calculate everything for you. So the very first thing, like I said, you're going to do a soil test. And maybe the next thing you're going to do beyond the soil test is you have a fall cover crop plan. So you'll go back over here and to the left-hand side of your budget template. You're going to select the quarter. And so that would be the first quarter because you're going to try to get your cover crop planted prior to the end of October. So that'll be the first quarter. You'll use the drop-down menu, which once you get this downloaded, you'll see there's a drop-down menu, and it will allow you to select which quarter you're going to implement that in. And then you move to the next box, and this is again your description of what you're going to do. And so you are in this one, you're going to purchase your multi-species cover crop mix and no-till planted. Let's go with that. So that's an overall description. Then you're going to move over to the durable goods section, which is that green colored section that Katie's on right now. You're going to move to the name of the durable good. And so that's going to be cover crop. And then you're going to describe the mix. So it's here that you're going to provide us with maybe it's a custom mix from a specific seed company. They have a fall soil builder or something like that, and they sell it. So that's where you're going to describe this and where it's going to come from. The next box is the number of units that you're going to purchase. You're going to do 1 acre of cover crop mix, And based on your conversations with your conservation planner, they recommend 45 pounds per acre of this specific cover crop mix. So you are going to purchase 45 pounds. And so that'll be the number of units that you're going to purchase. The unit of measurement that you're going to purchase will be pounds. We do one little note on the units of measure. We like you to be as specific as possible and use specific units of measure, such as pounds, tons, linear feet, etc. That way we know exactly what you're going to be implementing. We do not recommend the use of vague measurements such as packets or bags or bales or truckloads. Because these do not allow us at NMDA as well as our technical review committee to understand if you want to put out 1 truckload of compost versus 500 pounds of compost. That's a measurement that we can understand to see, what you're doing. So, but for our seed example, the units of measure are going to be pounds, and so you'll put pounds there. The cost per unit, you've done your research. You've called the company and they're going to charge you $15 per pound for your cover crop mix. And again, that will auto tabulate for you. And so you don't have to do any of the math. You just have to put in the first few numbers, the number of pounds, the cost per pound, and the spreadsheet will calculate it for you. Moving on, let's say you're going to purchase a durable good. And as Katie mentioned earlier, a durable good is one of those things that you purchase. It's tangible. It's something you can hold in your hand, and it's going to have an expected lifespan of more than 1 year. It's not something you're going to use up like cover crop seed or compost. We have some examples here. PVC pipe, T-post, wire. But for this example, we're going to purchase a rake because we're gonna hand incorporate that cover crop mix into our 1 acre market garden. So we're gonna purchase a rake. So you're gonna name your durable good. It's gonna be a rake, or maybe it's a garden rake. Be as specific as possible here. Again, the number of units, you're gonna buy 1. So you would put 1 unit in there. And then the unit of measurement would be each, because you're going to purchase 1 each of the rake, and then your cost per unit. So let's say the rake is $25. You're going to purchase 1 rake at $25, and the spreadsheet will auto calculate that for you. So again, we apologize for the technical difficulties that you're not seeing it on your screen, but I hope you understand that the budget template is divided up in such a way that you're going to provide all of your practices that you're going to complete in the first quarter. You're going to name that practice or name that good or service. And then you're going to describe whether it's a non-durable good, such as compost, cover crop seed, maybe a durable good, such as a garden rake, or maybe some PVC pipe. Maybe it's a livestock drinker to facilitate some grazing. And then also any services that you're going to require, from outside of your operation, such as, maybe you're going to hire somebody with a no-till drill, or of course we already mentioned the soil testing. Maybe you're going to hire somebody to do some chipping to get rid of, maybe some trees or, something like that. Those are all services. So you've got your non-durable goods, your durable goods, and your services. And again, we highly, highly encourage each and every potential applicant to read through those FAQs that Katie has put together, and we've all kind of had input on to guide you through this process so that your application is as smooth as possible and meets all the criteria of the Healthy Soil Program.
Dina, I want to highlight one quick thing for people. You mentioned that these are self-tabulating columns. This is a self-tabulating row. So you'll come up with a total dollar figure. We remind you here it cannot exceed $22,000. These remaining boxes, you'll offer us just the mileage between you and your project sponsor, so they get reimbursed for the trip that they come out to see you. NMDA will take care of reimbursing them for that. And this year we're offering 15% of total project funds to our project sponsors, meaning those soil and water conservation districts and those tribal governments will be allotted 15% of whatever you request in funding, because they do the heavy lifting in terms of keeping you on track with your activities and invoicing for reimbursement, that sort of thing. So again, my apologies to you that this did not function quite the way we wanted to, but we will spend some time on that in the March 5th webinar. So make sure you come back and join us for that. I'm going to take us back to the homepage for the individual applicants. I want to show you one last thing that I promised you, and that is that letter of support template. And I'll show it to you very quickly so that we can get to questions that have been plugged into the chat while we've been talking. So again, this first page, as I mentioned to you, gives you some background on the necessity of this document. You will see some important requirements from your project sponsor, including joining you for an online grant training come July the 10th. That date is already chiseled in stone, so you can add that to your calendar and hope that you are successful in winning a Healthy Soil Program grant award. They will come out to see you, your project sponsor. They will help you collect that pre-project soil sample, send it off for lab testing, and also help you assess it for its physical properties there in the field. One thing I want to make sure everyone is aware of is that these are taxable funds. So come the end of a calendar year within this grant, your project sponsor will issue you a particular IRS form if you're getting a grant of $600 or more. And that's very typical of our grants. They would be in excess of that amount. So I want to make sure that you are clear that this is taxable income at the end of the day. With this form, you'll be completing this page here. It's all about you, where you are, what your project is about, including those resource concerns, the principles you'll be applying, and what some of your major activities and expenses are. That's when you hand it over to your project sponsor and say, I really need your support for my project. They'll read back over the information you've provided. They may ask to see your conservation planning. They may ask to see your timeline and budget template. We encourage them to ask for these things so that they're fully aware of the project you intend to implement with their support. They're reminded of the same things I just addressed with you, and that's when they sign off. So you'll get back this completed document. That becomes something that you will later upload as part of your online application. Okay, and Dean, at this point, I'm going to actually stop sharing everything and we can sort through what's in the chat.
Okay, I'm gonna hit some of the questions in the chat first, and then after that, I think it would be good if if you have a question, we'll go ahead and open it up at that point in time. Katie, I'll let you take this first one. Would a school district count as an entity or an individual?
Hi, Courtney. Well, we always go back to the definition of an eligible entity as it's codified in the Healthy Soil Act. That's the legislation that created our program back in 2019. And we've looked at this so much that I'm just going to repeat it to you. So an eligible entity is a local governmental entity with proven land management capacity to support healthy soil. So when we receive applications from those parties that maybe aren't a tribal nation, maybe aren't a land grant, maybe aren't an acequia, if they believe themselves to be an eligible entity, we simply ask them to explain how they fit that definition coming straight out of the law that created our program. So just offhand, if they check that local governmental box, that's a good start. The next question would be, can they manage some land? Can they actually run a project on land that they have rightful access to? And that may vary from school to school, charter school versus a public school, that sort of thing. Okay, other questions that pop into your view there, Dee?
There's two questions that I think I can tie them into one. It's basically asking about if an individual applicant has an existing conservation plan, do they need a new one? The answer is you don't need a completely new conservation plan if you already have an existing one, but we require that it be updated. And the reason I say that is as you are, potentially implementing things from the time your conservation plan may have been completed, we need to know about that. And it's important for the conservation planner to know that, hey, I've been doing this since we last met to develop this conservation plan, even if it may have been 6 or 8 months ago. And so, no, you don't have to have a completely new one, but you must update it to account for any potential new conservation practices that you've already completed, or maybe some new resource concerns that have shown up or something to that effect. We do ask though if it was developed on the NMDA conservation planning template, that all that information be transferred to the updated FY25 conservation planning template. So I hope that answers those two questions. If not, just please let me know. But I think that should answer it.
Agreed. I'll grab this next question from Mark Nelson. What's the link for setting up a login for applying for the 2024 grants? So I'll actually drop that in the chat there, Mark. And that's one of the many resources you'll find hyperlinked on our website. Next question, also from Courtney, and that is, who can we contact for specific questions if our local NRCS and Soil and Water Conservation District aren't able to answer questions about eligible expenses? I would say do not be surprised, first off, that neither of those two parties has answers to those questions. Keep in mind, this is an NMDA program, Healthy Soil Program residing at NMDA, being responsive to the constraints of our procurement code. So those questions are best posed to our Healthy Soil Program, of course, but typically when we see those questions, we say, you know what, actually we address that in our FAQ. So you'll want to make sure that you take a look at those frequently asked questions. Gosh, I think we occupy more than longer than a page to spell out some of the examples that are out of bounds for funding. So take a look there first. And then, of course, as with anything related to NMDA's Healthy Soil Program, I mentioned this email address earlier. I'll pop it in the chat, but that's a great way to reach us all. And multiple people put eyes on that account, so we'll route it to the appropriate person. Other questions jumping out at you, Dean?
Well, the next question, I'll answer that real quick. It's from Rebecca. Is laser leveling considered a covered specialized service that might be eligible for funding? Laser leveling is not eligible for funding because it requires specialized designs, and so we do not fund that particular practice. Moving on, there's a question from Christine. Is this funding competitive, or is it available for every eligible candidate with a viable application? As Katie mentioned earlier, this is a competitive grant process, and you are evaluated, or your grant application is evaluated by a technical review committee. And so, yes, it is a competitive process. And that's why we encourage potential applicants to get with both their project sponsor and NRCS as soon as possible, because NRCS can, of course, guide you through the conservation planning process and provide a good level of expertise in land management, but also your project sponsor can too. As Katie mentioned, those eligible entities, specifically SWCDs or a tribal government, have specific expertise in or ability to manage land, and so they can also help you put together a quality application. And so we encourage you to get with your potential project sponsor as soon as possible, because they do kind of have some ins and outs of local land management that they could help you in that competitive process. Katie, I don't know if you want to say something else on that one.
Perfectly put. Perfectly put the way you had it. I'll move on to the next question in the interest of time. Actually, two questions. One I can tackle really easily. Courtney, to your question about a link to the FAQ, we typically send people to that whole webpage for individual applicants. So you've got everything you need there in context, but I'll draw your attention to the top of the screen there, and that's where you'll find that link to the FAQ, specific again to individual applicants. Next question comes from Julianne. Are the funds only reimbursements, or can you pay for some materials directly? It's a good question, and our program is based entirely on reimbursement. If that makes you go, whoa, I don't know that I can carry a whole project for 10 months and wait for reimbursement, we say, don't worry about it, because we'll reimburse you a little at a time, a little at a time, a little at a time. So in fact, we receive requests for reimbursement typically on a monthly basis from our individual applicants. And there is some bridge funding available outside of NMDA. I don't have that information for you this evening, but I'll be sure to have that available come March the 5th. Again, that's from outside of NMDA to help you with those initial startup costs to getting your project moving at the start before you then switch over and seek reimbursement from NMDA. Question from Les, can we obtain a copy of all slides shown tonight? Les, we will be posting that again on that same individual applicant webpage, and we'll also be reminding you of that in our weekly newsletter. So make sure you're subscribed to that so that we can send you reminders of important program updates and deadlines and that sort of thing. Dean, a good question for you here from Ron Garay. Last year, only one soil test for the whole year. So I'm guessing he wonders if that's the same case this year.
Yes, Ron. Basically, what that is based on, we only require and will reimburse pre-project soil testing because there's not likely to be a tremendous amount of difference in the chemical makeup of your soil over 1 year, but also that's based on the recommendations from NRCS, but also the technical review committee that takes a look at this based on the number of acres, the type of cropping system. Those types of things all come into play. But yes, we only require pre-project soil testing, and that's typically one test throughout the grant period at the beginning. So I hope that answers your question.
Dean, do you want to talk about soil assessment and why we require that at both the start and the end of a project?
Okay, now soil assessment is just a little bit different than soil testing. Soil assessment to me is the actual fun part. You actually get out there. You do water infiltration tests, compaction tests, aggregate stability tests, and what these tests do is we do require them pre-project and post-project. Is there are likely to be some changes in your aggregate stability if you incorporate a cover crop or if you decrease the tillage. Your water infiltration rates are likely to go up even in 10 months if you implement a cover crop or maybe some deep-rooted tillage radishes or something like that. And so the soil assessment is something that you complete typically with your project sponsor, and also NRCS would likely help you with this too. That's just completed in the field. It's free. And actually, you can do that as much as you want to throughout the grant period, but we do require the assessment information be provided to us before project activities commence and after project activities are completed so that we can see the difference in your soils over that 10-month period, because the physical attributes of your soil are likely to change, whereas the chemical attributes are not likely to change in 10 months. So hopefully that'll kind of give you a little bit of background on the soil assessment and testing, and we will also have a document forthcoming that will guide you through the entire process.
Thanks, Dean. I know we're right at 7 o'clock. Because I had some technical difficulties that cost us a little bit, I want to maybe allot 5 more minutes to wrap up some of the questions left here in the chat. So one entered by Rachel, echoed by Christine. What are the funding success rates for applicants in past years, or the number of applications received versus the number of those funded? I don't have that information committed to memory, but I can reflect on last year. Last year being this current year, projects are still ongoing. They'll wrap up at the end of May, same as your project, if you're funded, will be the case this time next year. So this year we have about 50 projects. There were somewhere on the order of between, I believe, 85 and 90 projects submitted for funding last year. So let me explain to you kind of the process that we use for ultimate selection of our grants. First off, Dean and I are putting eyes on things and making sure, is this truly a soil health improving project? It's not a landscaping project. It's not a project to feed somebody's cattle on the taxpayer dime. We're weeding out those projects and making sure these are truly soil health projects. Next, we put them to our external reviewers. We've got people from NRCS, people from Extension who are soil scientists looking at these proposals, and basically everyone collectively offering some feedback. Is this a valid project that should move forward? So that's the process by which recommendations are made to the Secretary of Agriculture, and he has the final ink to put on what moves forward with our selection process. So again, I can illustrate for you just the 1 year that's very fresh in my mind. I don't know that it's representative of the past 4 years of funding, but I will tell you that the overall amount available to us this year is about $1 million. So we're offering $22,000 per project to individual applicants, and up to $100,000 per project for our eligible entities. And we'll see how that gets requested in this coming cycle. Dean, a final question here for you. Is water management runoff covered? How would you answer that?
Actually, there was one above that, Katie, that I wanted to address because I think we have a lot of individuals that may fall in this category. Robin asked the question, as a nonprofit community farm, we have had challenges with eligibility through NRCS because they treat us like private individuals and require certain information to develop farm records with USDA Service Center. I'm adding to that because I kind of know where the question is going. And Robin, that's the exact reason that that we created the conservation planning templates. NRCS provides free conservation planning to any individual without requiring the establishment of farm records. And so we created the conservation plan template so that they have a document to record their conservation plan on outside of the normal USDA system. And so I think there's probably a lot of individuals that really don't want to establish farm records with NRCS, or in your specific situation, it's a community farm, it's a nonprofit, and so going through the USDA system poses some challenges. And so I just want to encourage you to visit with your local NRCS office and just let them know that you're only applying for the Healthy Soil Program and that you would just like to go with the conservation planning template. If you kind of run into any obstacles, please let the HSP team know, and we will kind of help you through that process. But that's the process for individuals, farmers, ranchers, land managers who do not wish to or can't establish farm records with USDA.
Tina, I don't see anything left outstanding in the chat other than those questions that we always anticipate, which is this X, Y, or Z eligible or ineligible for funding? So again, we encourage you to check out our frequently asked questions document to see if that fits within the general guidelines. As I mentioned in response to Courtney's question earlier, if you've got a really specific item and you go, gosh, I don't know if it fits in, if it doesn't, that's when you send us an email. So check out our FAQ first and then be in touch with us at our email address that I'll again be providing in the chat if what you find there doesn't quite hit the nail on the head of your question. Any closing comments from you, Dean, as we wrap up here this evening?
I'll go ahead and address that water management question. That would be something that we'd probably need to kind of look at a little bit more in depth to see exactly what you're wanting to do and how you're proposing to do it. If it does require engineering designs, I'm going to go ahead and say it's probably off limits because anytime we're dealing with water, we have the possibility of making things worse rather than better if not properly designed. And so, and I would encourage you to work with your NRCS planner, but also feel free to shoot us an email at the email that Katie just put up there, and I could get back with you, and maybe we could kind of get a little bit more specifics on that. But as a general rule, if it requires engineering designs, it's pretty much off limits for the Healthy Soil Program. But I want to thank everyone who attended. Thank you for the great questions, and thank you for taking a part of your evening to learn about the Healthy Soil Program. And it's our hope that you can get with NRCS and a potential project sponsor as soon as possible and get the ball rolling and apply for the FY25 Healthy Soil Program.
Perfect notes to end on. Thank you for coming tonight, and we hope to see you back here March the 5th. So get subscribed to our newsletter, stay in touch with us on our website, and we'll see you back here after the application's made available. That way you can put eyes on it, come up with some questions, pose those to us. We'll walk through that budget template that was giving us fits this evening. So we wish you a great evening, and we look forward to seeing what soil health projects come our way from your desk. Thanks, everyone. Have a great evening.